panel entitled How to Overcome Violence. This sounds like a very big question for 1 hour and 20 minutes, and we will not provide you with an answer here on this general question, but we will be focusing on the communication space, how to work in the communication space, in the communication field regarding violence, war, and peace. Myself, I'm Laurent Goetschel, Director of Swiss Peace and Professor of Political Science here in Basel. I will be the moderator, as you may already have sensed, and I'm sitting here together with 3 fantastic persons to my right, seen from you, starting from the right side with Adam Luppel. Adam Luppel is Vice President of the International Peace Institute, the IPI, a very important think tank located in New York, right opposite to the building of the United Nations. Besides him, we have Caroline Vuillemin. Caroline is director of the Fondation Hirondelle. And Hirondelle is a very nice bird in French. And she's, however, not here in regard to this birds, but in regard to this foundation, which is very active in the field of communication in fragile context. The foundation is located in Lausanne. And finally, we have Andrea Cairola, who is came in from Paris today with the TGV, almost on time. And he is advisor with the Section for Freedom of Expression and Safety of Journalists with UNESCO. I don't have to say anything more about UNESCO. So together, we will try to discuss important issues linked to the communication in regard to war, in regard to peace. And having said this, I can already link up to 2 statements which I picked up during the plenary session, in which I assume you also participated just before. We had the Ethiopian President Sahle-Work Zewde, who talked about the importance, the negative importance of irresponsible speech in regard to the situation in her country. But we also had Patricia Danzi, the director of Swiss Development Corporation, who maybe unintentionally referred also to the core of the topic of this workshop, because she said at the very beginning that the timing of this year's conference topic, peace, was very topical, because whatever newspaper you would open, whatever TV channel you would watch, you would always read or hear or see something about peace. And actually, I think, she's not here to defend herself, of course, but I think her intention was very good, mentioning this, but actually what we see is war, and we talk a lot about war. And so actually what we want to do here in this workshop is to look at different narratives in regard to what's happening. And when we talk about narrative, there are many definitions about narratives, and even though I'm a professor, I'm not going to enter into different narratives, but just give you a very brief understanding of what it is for me and how I will be using it when moderating this panel. So narrative, for me, is a story, is an account of a string of events occurring in a particular space, in a particular time sequence, and we don't see them as randomly aligned, but we try to build some logic between them. It may be an attempt to explain them, to make them understandable, but at least to give sense to what we observe. And of course, we can do this in different ways, and we can do this in ways which we would see as more conducive to conflict and war, or we can do this in a way which we would think is more conducive to peace, or at least to the de-escalation of war. So this as a background also to have the frame set for what we are talking about. And You are here, quite many in this room. I'm very happy to see all of you, but be aware that we have a similar number of persons, I was told, who are with us virtually, which is very nice because many people cannot manage, for whatever reasons, to travel to Basel, and so they will also be participating in this event. We had the intention, Isabel Prinzing from Communication in Swisspeace and myself, to conduct a very interactive and even slightly innovative format with all of you. But when we had this idea, we also thought there would be a little bit less people than you actually now are. And at that time, we weren't also totally aware that there would be the virtual participants also in here. So there were some limits which were caused to our conception of this workshop, and yet we will try to be as interactive as possible with you. You will not have the possibility to ask questions directly speaking to us, but you will be involved with a tool called Slido, and I'm sure you're all familiar with this, and I'm sure you also all have a cell phone near you, and you see here how to register on Slido. And in order to get you even more acquainted to it, we will start, before we enter into the panel, with three questions where you will be asked to respond in one way or the other. And be aware that there will be questions. I will try to repeat it when we get to the question, but in case I forget, usually it's related to a number, so it's very easy. And sometimes it's a little bit more difficult. You may enter a word. Yeah? And I'm mentioning this here not because I think you don't know how to spell a word, but because I would ask you to enter the word in English. Otherwise it won't work. So we do have simultaneous translation here in French and German, but if you enter a word in Slido, please enter it in English. Having said this, I think we can start with three questions. It's more a warm-up technically, but it's also a warm-up content-wise. And you see the first question here, which reads, to what extent do you think narratives play a role in understanding contemporary conflicts? So it's about the raison d'être of the topic of our workshop. So to what extent do you think narratives play a role in understanding contemporary conflicts? So we see here the results. You still see the question? No, you also see the results. So it's not extremely surprising, but it's still comforting to see that a majority, about 2/3 of you, the persons present here and the persons participating virtually, who have equally the possibility to also participate in these surveys, about 2/3 of you think that we will be talking about an important issue. Thank you. Second question, what contemporary conflict comes to your mind when you think of narratives? So the idea here is that you would mention one conflict geographically of which you think narratives are really important, and please enter it in English, as I said. And we still have the conflicts coming in. And this is a word cloud logic, so for those of you who might not be familiar with it, the larger the text, the more people enter this word. Yeah? So we get here a certain diversity, but the most prominent conflicts popping up are also not a big surprise, but they confirm that actually the issue is not only relevant per se, but the issue is relevant in regard to conflicts which are very present in the actual discourses and discussions going on, Ukraine, Gaza, Israel, Palestine. But we also have Sudan, quite big here, and many other conflicts ranging from Congo and Goma through Ethiopia. We have been hearing about it just before, to Ireland, to also not forget that Europe also has conflicts in the western part of Europe, and I won't go through all of them. Thank you very much for this, and hurrying up to the third introductory question, which reads, how prepared, it's a little bit more complex now, how prepared do you feel peace builders are to address the challenges related to narratives of peace and conflict? And there we would want you to ask to rate it from 1 to 5. It's a self-assessment, but it's totally anonymous, so don't be shy about it and try to be honest. And it's a very important question also for the rest of the discussion we'll be having. So we see that about 40%, about 40% think they are not totally badly equipped, but actually second worst possibility, and we have 27% who think it's neither bad nor good. So all in all, one can say we have about 2/3 to 3/4 of the participants online and present here who think it could be better, but they know already something about it and they are already equipped to a certain degree. Thank you very much. And now you're all also totally familiar with Slido, and with this you can now rest for about 30 minutes because we will start the panel, and the panel will be structured in a way that we have prepared the panel, which hopefully is not a surprise to you, and there will be an introductory question adapted to each of the panelists. I will be asking the person, and the members of the panel are allowed to talk a little bit longer in their answer, up to 10 minutes. It's the introductory round, and we will then get more dynamic and shorter statements later on. And I'd like to start with my question to Adam Luppel, which is, Adam, actually, why do you think are local and national levels of particular importance at a time when the international order is unraveling? Of course, in regard also to the general thematic of our panel. Adam.
Excellent, thank you, Laurent. And then you can all rest, but I hope I don't put you to sleep. Yes, I'm going to talk a bit more, as you say, on the more general thematic topic of the session and the conference. But on narrative, I'll say this to start: the world is divided, and we are living the extreme consequences of that division, or that is the narrative that we are hearing repeatedly. And like all meta-narratives, it contains a kernel of truth, but it's not the whole story. And I'm going to come back to that thought at the end. There is no avoiding it, though, and we've been just talking about hearing some of this in the plenary session. The state of international peace and security is dire. And it is not just the most recent tragedies unfolding in Israel-Palestine, or Ukraine, or Sudan, or Haiti, and others mentioned there. According to the Uppsala Data Program, the number, intensity, and length of conflicts worldwide is at its highest level since before the end of the Cold War. And the international system of collective security, in particular the system centered on the UN Security Council, would seem unable to respond with adequate measures, no fault of the Swiss seat on the Council. It is a very dangerous time. And so the broadest question of this session, how to overcome violence, is a difficult one. The causes of violence in our time are many and complex. The UN Secretary General's new agenda for peace, which everybody, I work at the International Peace Institute of New York, and everybody in New York is very focused on the new agenda for peace and the upcoming Summit of the Future. The new agenda for peace identifies trust, solidarity, and universality as the core principles of an effective collective security system that could help respond to these many challenges that we face. And yet we know, this was talked about in the plenary, trust is at an all-time low among governments, between governments and international organizations, and between governments and their people. International solidarity was profoundly damaged by the inequality of the pandemic response, and universality has been undermined for years by double standards on all sides, from Iraq to Gaza and beyond. If we want to build international trust and solidarity, universality is the key. There is no trust or solidarity if international rules are applied selectively based upon geopolitical interest and military power rather than universally according to the law. At the core of violent conflict today lies a general decay in universal commitments to international law, and particularly normative constraints on the use of force, both on when and how it is used, putting civilians in particular at increased risk. And this generates a vicious cycle where violence only begets more violence. If we want to rebuild our capacity for collective security and overcome the spread of violent conflict, we must demand consistency in the application of international norms. Easier said than done. Trust is easy to break, but it is very difficult to rebuild. How do we begin? We are in a moment of geopolitical transformation, and during this time, the stitches of global order will be stretched, tested, and many times they will fray. They are fraying as we speak. So we must be realistic. International trust and solidarity will not be rebuilt snap of our fingers as much as we'd like. We must build from the bottom up and from the inside out. The new agenda for peace places national action at the center. National governments have the primary responsibility to sustain peace within their borders, and decades of experience has shown that international interventions are powerless to build peace without the leadership of local and national partners. You asked me about the connection between the local, national, and international. And this is not an agenda restricted to only the least developed or conflict-affected countries. All states, low, middle, and high income, have work to do and must commit to build national prevention strategies, and this is beginning to happen. Just last month, for example, Norway, Kenya, and Timor-Leste each presented their strategies to the UN Peacebuilding Commission. But what should these strategies entail? If consistency is the key to rebuilding trust, comprehensiveness is the key to building peace. This is not a new insight, as it is fully in line with the Sustainable Development Goals, but I take it as potentially transformative, the recognition in the new agenda for peace that the cause of peace entails a commitment to the eradication of all forms of violence, including, if not especially, gender-based violence. And the President of Ethiopia spoke specifically about this eloquently. And this comprehensiveness to address all forms of violence means that as the promotion of international peace and security requires action at the national level, effective national action requires engagement and inclusion at the local level. As the seams of global order are coming undone, it is local level peace builders that are keeping the stitches from unraveling completely. Recently at IPI, we had a visit from a group of women peace builders from Ukraine. And it was truly striking to me how different their concerns were from the top level messages you hear from Kyiv, Washington, or Berlin. As the necessary debates continue about what military support is needed to defend Ukraine against Russian aggression, the local level peace builders are discussing psychosocial support, care for the wounded and displaced, the orphaned, employment, intercommunal dialogue, all those challenging social issues that will have to be dealt with when rebuilding begins. And this is why women and local civil society must be part of any peace process anywhere. Because without them, what you get is a negotiation and a competition about power among men with guns rather than a whole of society plan for sustaining peace over time. And we know that including women in peace process increases the chances of success, and this is backed up by the data, has been noted many times. So to conclude, to come back to the narrative question that I started with. I dare to say that the world is not as divided as it would appear to be, as the dominant narrative suggests. I recently had the honor of moderating 2 ambassadorial level discussions on global governance and the role of small states like Switzerland in advance of September's Summit of the Future in New York. And when you convene small and medium-sized states around discussions of multilateralism, one finds a tremendous amount of agreement among a broad cross-regional group around the values of international cooperation. We're at the International Cooperation Forum. When you compare national level action plans for conflict prevention, and when you talk to local level peace builders, you find a tremendous amount of agreement around the need for these whole of society comprehensive approaches. If we want to overcome violence and division, we must keep those basic areas of common understanding in mind as all stakeholders work to seize the upcoming opportunities to build a more peaceful, secure, and sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. Excellent, both in terms of content and particularly also in regard to timekeeping, because the first speaker always sets the rules, yeah? So I'm very grateful for you for this, and well, particularly also for stressing the importance of the local level and the importance of trust. And now building on this, turning to Caroline, I mean, the local level, the importance of communication, what do actually the media need for effective communication for peace from the side of political actors and authorities? What are the expectations and the hopes? Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Laurent. Hello, everyone. How to overcome violence and what do the media need? I will not really talk about narratives because I will really talk from the media information perspective, where actually journalists reveal facts and provide space for dialogue. And through these facts and dialogue, you can build and create the peace and the trust among various groups of the society. Because indeed, media can play a role in building peace and fostering peace, a positive role, to prevent conflicts, to mitigate conflicts, and to foster peace. And I know it's probably hard to believe when we see the world today, or where we look back 30 years ago as we commemorate the 30th Rwandan genocide, this week, and we remember the role of hate media and Radio Mille Collines. But, and this is the experience of Fondation Hirondelle, providing information at the local level for creating space for dialogue, it is possible to have a positive element for peace through media. How do you do that, and what do you need? Actually, 3 things. The first one is to recognize, as we analyze conflict and do political analysis, the role and the sector of the media. Understand how the media work and support and use them properly. And here I'm talking about public interest media made by journalists for the good of the people. Very often, when there is an analysis of conflict, the media sector is not looked at. It is only used or considered as a way of communicating peace, reaching out narratives. But the media play a key role in allowing various points of views to be expressed and opening space for all parts and all groups to be heard and express their views. It's getting better to consider the role of media and to have, as you said, Alan, a whole of society approach with media, from the citizen perspective to the media sector, to the legal perspective and the societal perspective. For instance, the Swiss Cooperation created guidelines on how to develop the role of media in creative, inclusive, just and peaceful societies, supporting the SDG 16. The OECD just released the principle on relevant and effective support to media for a peaceful environment. These are very positive steps, but you mentioned the new Agenda for Peace, and various documents are now circulating from the UN to imagine the future of our multilateral system, and one of them is the Pact for the Future. The draft 0 of the Pact for the Future does not mention once access to information, right to freedom of expression, independent media, and information integrity. So we still have to do a lot as civil society and as member states to push these values and these principles in the text. We also need a global framework, and I think Andrea will talk about it, for the regulation of the tech platforms, which empowers currently the media to work with principles to push forward public interest information. I do believe, and I'm still hopeful, that at the multilateral level, the UN is the right place and the key actor to push for positive and strong media. And we have several living examples, like Radio Okapi in the DR Congo. Radio Okapi was created in collaboration with Fondation Hirondelle and the peacekeeping operation at the time of MONUC, when it was created, and now UNESCO. And it was really a tool where Congolese people could reach out to each other again, starting in 2002, at a time where the country was divided and polarized by the conflict, and where Congolese civil society and governments and opposition and various point of views were able to express themselves again and be heard in the local languages by the majority of the people. So, providing that political will for recognizing positive role of media is possible. But that implies to understand the role of media. And if we can go back to the visual, please. I'd like to just run you through what we have experienced, the other one, the first one, as the vertical and horizontal role of media in peace process, but in general. Vertical one is pretty logical and well known. It is not only, of course, the top-down, but the bottom-up way, media as an intermediary, as the word says, between the elites, the leaders, the intermediary groups, and the population. To explain the policies, to explain the peace process, to accompany the process with the people, but also hear from the people expectations and grievances as we search for peace or to not create a new conflict or more violence. But that horizontal role of media is also very important and sometimes more overlooked. We heard during the plenary of the importance of women being at the table. I totally agree with this. But which woman? Is one woman representing all the women? No. So how do you guarantee that when you want to have women's perspective or youth perspective at the table, you indeed include everyone and all the group? The media can help. They can have that horizontal perspective, giving a voice to urban, rural, old, young, educated, not educated women, youth, and other participants. We are experiencing this in Central African Republic with Radio Ndeke Luka, for instance. We've been working in CAR since 2000. It may sound a very long time. It is not a project anymore. It is to fulfill the right of the people to access information in their local languages and to have an institution that can work and accompany them throughout what the country is going through. And we can go to the second slide. As you may know, Central African Republic is going from cycles of violence to peace processes and peace accords and violence again. At all these stages, the media are necessary, and to make sure you can reach the majority of the people through radio, if it is the media that people can access, and it is the case in Central African Republic. We tend to forget that not everyone is digital or going digital in this world. Only half of the world population actually has access to digital tools every day. And also reaching people in their language so they can really grasp what is going on and express themselves. So that role of proximity media at all steps of a peace process or a preventing conflict process is very important. And my last point is that third point that the media need to play their role. Obviously, they have to be supported, not only financially, but politically. And we go back to the first point of values, principles, believing in human rights, in the right to information, the right to freedom of expression, the right to access information. And if there is no political will for this, independent media cannot exist. Independent media are tools to provide information to people, to create trust, so that when there is a crisis or a peak of violence, people know to which media turn to, so they can have reliable information, maybe life-saving information about what's going on. Is it okay to go to the field today, or are they rebels or armed groups and I will be in danger? And that trust, that capacity to turn to a media you believe and you know you will be able to follow doesn't come from one day to the other. It comes over time. It comes from professionalism of the media, courage of the journalists, and people, audiences feeling that they are represented and heard by the media. This is what we are, for instance, doing in supporting Ukrainian media currently. As you said, Alan, when you speak with local journalists in Ukraine, they relate current issues of people, and surprisingly, it is not all about, the geopolitical elements of the war. It's about daily concerns. It's about, social cohesion. How do we continue to live, even as Ukrainian, as some Ukrainians, for instance, refuse or are reluctant to go to war as men, or some are considered as traitors? How do you think of building tomorrow a society, a cohesive society? And local media play a role for this, and this is what we are supporting them currently. We will be present, for instance, next month in Lviv for a forum for Ukrainian media, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be discussed on how internationally the Ukrainian media can be supported. So to conclude, 3 things that the media need: an enabling environment with political, financial, and societal support, a recognition at the international and local level that media is a sector that needs to be considered in conflict resolution, conflict analysis. And the third point is support and respect for the independence of media and editorial independence of media. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. We have entered the scenery of media and their conditions for operation, the very important role they are expected to play. Linking it back to the trust element Adam was stressing, we now get to Andrea actually looking at issues of validity, credibility of information, particularly during a conflict. Information may be contested, and a challenge that, of course, is being accelerated in the digital age. The elephant in the room we haven't directly touched yet. So how can we still enhance peace-building narratives in your perspective?
Bonjour, guten Tag, buongiorno, good afternoon. Thank you to Swiss Peace, thank you Professor, thank you to SDC for the invitation. So as you said, this is a question we prepared, so I do have myself a presentation, and let me go back to the origin of UNESCO, the organization, and to the constitution which was adopted in 1945, where when we talk about narrative, it's relevant to recall a quote that you may already be familiar with. It's relatively well known, that since the world begins in the minds of men and women, it is in the minds of men and women that defense of peace must be constructed. So this is the very first line of the Constitution. And then in the preamble, we find some of the words that have just been referred to. You find the reference to trust, then to knowledge, ideas, to mutual understanding. And then, very important, the role of free flow of information, the free flow of ideas by word and images. So this was already there, and these, of course, are the basics, and they are reflected also in the international universal human rights. So it's there because it's been a constant. Then we'll arrive to what you specifically asked about, of course, the news related to the digital environment. It's been a constant. There is this famous quote, possibly from a Greek philosopher, that the first casualty of war actually is truth. And has been the case, is still the case. And then, as Caroline very well described, the first response to that is freedom of expression, as the right to seek, impart, and receive information as it is defined in Article 19 of the Universal Declaration and also the ACCPR. So then to translate this, Caroline well described the role of free, independent, pluralist media. This is also in the Window Declaration in 1991, in memory of which the World Precision Day was created, that we are humble, we have the privilege to co-organize with partners and CSO like Fondazione Randell every year a global conference and celebration around the world. But then fast forward 30 years after, there is the Window Plus 30 Declaration, information as a public good, which is also adding the role of media viability. Public interest media are actually in a very weak financial and viable situation around the world. The importance of transparency of the online platform and digital platform, and then the importance of media information literacy, the importance from the consumer side, from the audience side, from the citizen side. So how to walk the talk, how to transform this in practice. I have a few examples and then a deep dive, but I promise I will stick to the 10 minutes. So to seek information, you need, of course, to have the information. You need to have the memory, which is a fundamental role. So talking about memory, earlier this week there was the commemoration of the 30th anniversary of the tragedy of the Rwanda genocide. You see here tweets with our Director General there, and the memorial for the genocide has been inscribed as a heritage. So of course this has to do with also keeping the memory, continuing the memory. Talking about memory also, there is a program, the third heritage program of UNESCO, Memory of the World, about documentary heritage, which is also registering a collection that are related to human rights. And again, this part of truth and reconciliation, in this case you see an example in Korea. But then on top of the memory, there is the access to information, which was mentioned. So in the center you see a project that was implemented with the World Bank in Colombia, where the access information component is there for the media, but also for the civil society. And then from that, there is the participatory process that is enabled by having access to this information. And then moving further to what you said about the narrative, of course, also the messages, the narratives that are developed by civil society. Then last, allow me to go now to another region after Africa, Latin America, and Asia, to Europe. For instance, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as in other country societies, Europe, we've been supporting the creation of press council that are to promote media professionalism, so to avoid what was mentioned about the role sometimes of unprofessional media to foster hate speech, narratives, etc. But to promote, of course, respecting their independence. So in this case, you see a project about the Press and Online Media Council of Bosnia has been doing in terms of also developing a network of lawyers specialized on media issues to defend journalists, and is, by the way, supported also by the Swiss Development Agency through the Global Media Defense Fund. Then let me deep dive to conclude on a specific project, Social Media for Peace. Project that we say flagship, innovative, to try to provide responses in sometimes of course, challenging and innovative way to these challenges. So the process and the project has basically three components. One is research, one is to curb online harmful content, and the other one is to support peace-building narratives. As I said, it was implemented in 4 continents, in 4 pilot countries, and some of the results are, first, the importance to involve the civil society, all sides of civil society, in a truly multi-stakeholder approach to respond to the challenge of harmful content. For instance, there are 3 coalitions that have been created in Indonesia, in Bosnia, and in Kenya, which are bringing together those NGOs involved in internet governance, those involved in human rights promotion, those involved in other issues that are related to this triple nexus that we mentioned. And they are providing policy advice, but also they are monitoring disinformation and hate speech online, giving inputs to the online platform which are around this table, around this discussion, so that they can better fine-tune the content moderation. Another concrete result has to do with the journalist community, because this has been massively training journalists in conflict-sensitive reporting. And then last but not least, the role of civil society and also of educators in promoting critical thinking. So here comes the issue of media information literacy. So to provide the tools to the citizen themselves, of course, to be resilient to narrative speech. Not that we have to put the burden only on them. Again, it's an holistic approach, but also, of course, to empower them with this critical thinking. And then to conclude, this kind of exercise, as part of a broader exercise, has been feeding into the guidelines for safeguarding freedom of expression and access to information with a multi-stakeholder approach, which has been a process that took elements from this project I mentioned, but also there was a very wide multi-stakeholder consultation, a conference, over 10,000 inputs from over 150 countries, And all this has been to provide a response while respecting human rights to the fact that the digital ecosystem is flooded, of course, with disinformation, misinformation, hate speech. Digital ecosystem is allowing an unprecedented freedom of expression, but then, of course, there is also this aspect. So briefly, because I know I'm running out of time, how to respond to that, then we can further develop during the Q&A we have after. So there are overall principles. First of all, multi-stakeholderism. Then, of course, is a collective effort where we have to avoid fragmentation, we have to respect fundamental human rights, but at the same time we have also to work with the different stakeholders. So there is an issue related, of course, to the policymaker, to the online platform, their duty and responsibilities, to the and then, of course, to the journalists and the civil society. So the fundamental principles in relation in particular to the digital platforms, then there are other principles also for the other stakeholders are mentioned, have to do, of course, with complying to human rights due diligence, have to do with adhere to international human rights standards by design, has to do with transparency, with accessibility of information, and of course eventually to accountability to all the stakeholders that are involved. I stop here because I know we have little time, but hope I respect it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for this third contribution, Andrea. And we now leave this three contribution as such. We'll get back to one or the other of these issues. But before we'll do this, we again want to include you as participants, virtually and physically present. And we'll start with a further question, which reads as follows. What are the attributes of an effective peace narrative? You should have this question. You'll see it there. So again, it's the same access as before. So if you think now, we've been talking a lot about the framework conditions and also the support of media, the access to media, and also measures undertaken to fight, to prevent a lack of trust in media. But if we think about the content of a narrative, what do you think would be the most essential attributes? So you again enter words, and these words should then form to some kind of word clouds. If it works, it is not working that way. So we're getting a lot of element. You can see them running down as I do them. I try to keep most of them. And picking out maybe, thank you, you're very productive. This is flowing somewhere. So if oh yes, and I can count, obviously. If I would be able to read, I would also be more meaningful in what I'm saying. So we see inclusivity, we see transparency, we see equality as dominant element. Now, if I take up these 2-3 elements, inclusivity, transparency, equality, this gets back a bit to what you were saying, which is not bad per se, all the contrary. But if we think now about all these conditions, if we think about giving access to everyone, having democratic control of media, having a diversity of voices, being inclusive, and if we now think a bit about, I call it now the war propaganda, coming from different parties. I'm not accusing any actor in particular. I mean, isn't this kind of inclusive, equitable, democratic content of peace narratives doomed or deemed to fail compared to the highly sophisticated, very objective-driven propaganda of one or the other of the actors? I mean, is it realistic to follow up the logic or the criteria which were listed regarding peace narratives compared to the existing other animals in the field? Caroline, you're looking at me in a way that you might be willing to answer.
Yeah, I'll try. Well, you know, that war propaganda, you have to look at it from two perspectives. One is the content. The purpose and the claims or the truth from that propaganda, where do they come from? Do they have a reality check? If so, you have to include them in the debate somehow and find, again, the spaces where you will have around the same table people with diverging views on the reasons of a conflict or the sources of the conflict, and have them debate non-violently. But because if there is some legitimacy in the analysis and the root causes, it has to be heard. Otherwise, you're marginalizing everyone that lives that reality. If the propaganda is a lie, is manipulation, is artificially present through robots and technological tools, I think we have to continue offering alternative content. Maybe we will not win on the technology, the financial means of the war propaganda actors, but people have the right to have an alternative and know that this is a lie. You can believe if it goes to believing, it's irrational, so you cannot change people's mind. But they have to at least know that this is not based on fact. If you want to see the fact, you can go there and have the facts.
Yes, Adam?
Well, on this point about sort of listening to you, I think, so in some respects, the digital marketplace, the information marketplace today is the most inclusive ever, and that you can, more people can engage in public discussion than ever. But that doesn't mean that the loudest voices should be the most included. Right, that inclusion doesn't mean amplifying the loudest voices, and forgive me, I'm pulling up a quote on my phone that I read recently, which I think is from 1934, but it's pertinent. The epoch-making discovery of modern dictatorships is the invention of the loud lie, based on the psychologically correct assumption that people will believe a shout when they doubt speech. And I think the question is, what is speech in these contexts? Not much of what we're hearing that is geared towards division is not speech that lends itself to inclusivity. It's actually meant to exclude rather than to include.
Thank you. So I'm not gonna give the word to all of you for each question, otherwise we'll run out of time, but you will all get the opportunity to say something. There. No, that's okay. No. It wasn't a critique, it was just
interaction.
Prevention. We'll move on to a next question to everyone, which is much more concrete, meaning stating, can you name an example of a successful narrative from the peace fields, if you wish, or from another field, health prevention, climate change, where you think that's really a narrative which is constructive, objective driven, and which helps solve a problem, and which was actually the dominant narrative in a particular field. Do you have something which comes to your mind from whatever field of social, political life you would be thinking about? So we have campaigns for prevention of AIDS, federalism in Bosnia, COVID, smoking, probably non-smoking, but yeah, AIDS again, harm reduction. So maybe taking this, we see a bit where it's going to. I mean, the question to you, maybe also from I mean, I know you are active in a particular field, but UNESCO is also active in other fields. I mean, would you say that, how to say, objective-driven, successful, constructive narratives are more difficult in the field of peace and war than in other fields? I mean, is it more complex to be constructive in terms of communication and effective at the same time regarding these fields than health-related issues, which were now mostly mentioned in the responses?
It's a huge challenge being objective, as you said, also referring to what's said before, being factual, verified information, and responding to this, but also to what's said earlier. Really, the verification is crucial, and one element of the verification is, of course, the access. So the journalists are, of course, professionally equipped to verify. They are first fact checkers of any narrative, counter-narrative, propaganda, etc. They need access. And one big challenge to access, of course, the issue of safety of journalists, which is a major issue around the world, has been during the COVID crisis, is of course in conflict, is in non-conflict environment. We, as UNESCO, coordinate the implementation of the UN Plan of Action on Safety of Journalists and Impunity, and fortunately our monitoring, there is a specific observatory on killed journalists, but also there is a specific indicator, SDG 1610.1, which is monitoring also other forms of attacks which are non-fatal attacks against journalists, and all parameters are really tragic, and there is a huge impunity for that. So let me recall the fundamental role of journalism and of public interest information in this equation, and of course the fundamental role of fact checkers, of media as fact checker. And then in relation to the digital environment, we have also these relatively new stakeholders which are the fact checkers, but also media themselves are fact checkers.
When I continue to read the examples you provided, one of the impressions I get is that possibly it's much easier to have an effective narrative discourse on issues which are very concrete and where the goods and the bads are clearly stated. I mean, people want to be healthy, people want to have certain degrees of solidarity within a group, but they may fundamentally disagree in regard to a conflictual situation. So are we facing a really much more difficult and different situation in regard to peace and conflict? Caroline, you...
No, I'm very surprised to see COVID as a good example, because we've never seen such an infodemic before COVID. I mean, It was really what made the world of disinformation and manipulation and lies explode around a health issue at a scale we had never seen before worldwide. So for me, I think the field of rumors and manipulation and disinformation is fear. And it is built on what people do not know and what they fear. And this is where it is a very vicious cycle, because maybe you don't know because you don't have access. And so it's at the advantage of the manipulating people to make sure there is no access to information, or to just push information that will enforce and enhance that fear. And for me, being health, being climate change, being peace, if people knew, if transparency, and including officials and authorities were transparent enough to say, we don't know, sorry, we don't know, this is too complex, this is too soon, we don't have answers, that would ease down the fear and the possibility for manipulation and disinformation to grow.
Thank you, Caroline. So with this, we actually built the bridge to the following question, which is about the authors of communication. I mean, we didn't tackle it directly, but it was mentioned indirectly several times. So in your opinion, who are the best suited actors to create peace narrative. This is also an issue which popped up in several questions which are also mentioned in the chat from people not present here. So who is best suited to create peace narratives? Children, that's a very nice one. Affected people, journalists, women, local communities. Women are growing, youth, civil society, local communities, affected people, governments, independent organizations. Adam, when you're looking at this word cloud, you were talking about the different levels. What would you say? I mean, does it make sense at all to contribute to narratives at the global level, or should we relate totally to local levels? I mean, if we would have much more power than we do, you know, and we could decide where communication should take place, which narratives should dominate, should we focus ourselves to enable local actors to create whatever narratives they think are the best suited to their problems and solutions to their problems?
Well, I mean, it might have come as no surprise. I think there's a role for every level, and so to ask, you know, who is the best suited, it depends upon what level you're at, because there is this global narrative, and I think that the narrative of division is not a helpful one, and it would be helpful if there was more of our global leaders speaking in terms of the ways in which we all have a common interest to address climate change, for example. I mean, this is a narrative that should unite us, and I think also there is a narrative around international humanitarian law that we all should be able to come around our humanity in order to come together on. But it's not surprising to me, or it's interesting to me, that this word cloud has so many. Some of the other word clouds have some really big terms, and this one has just a lot of little ones, because I think it's true. Many different sectors have a role to play. I think at the local level, obviously, I think local level civil society, women have a strong role. Part of me on this question related to peace and security, there's a corner of my mind that goes to issues around atrocity prevention and identity-based violence, and the need to confront divisive narratives there. And I think that their leadership is important. Leadership around narratives of inclusion as opposed to exclusion based upon identity. And you can, those who may know the work of Scott Strauss, I don't know if he's actually maybe here, has done some really important work on historical narratives, and the need to look back and articulate ways in which the histories of countries can be built around more holistic narratives around commonality rather than ethnic division.
What was also mentioned in the chat is the question about the role of private actors. So when listening to you now also, and to what was said before, I mean, Elon Musk has an incredible influence regarding the access of groups to certain social media channels. There's a whole debate about artificial intelligence and what it does with what people are contributing. So what would you say about these actors? I mean, is this something which is included into UNESCO's work in this field? I mean, do you talk to people like Musk? I mean, is he involved in one of the activities or the projects, or is there a policy in regard to this type of issues?
So let me reply in two ways. First, the UN, and not only UNESCO, has a dialogue and an exchange and involvement, of course, with the major online platforms. There is the guidelines I mentioned here, at which there has been also major contribution from the relevant private sector, and there is, of course, the Global Digital Compact was a process for the entire UN. And the second aspect I would like to mention is that actually it was UNESCO that just 2 years ago developed the first global tool on the ethics of AI, ethics of artificial intelligence, and that has been approved by UNESCO General Conference. Is a tool that includes also the human rights based approach by design, and of course is a recommendation. It's not legally binding, but that's a part of contribution to tackle these challenges.
Yeah, if I may add, I think what we missed over the last 20 years is a regulatory framework for digital tools and digital platforms. If I just look at the media, when the radio was created, when the TV was created, before that, when the newspaper were created, you had a framework through which you had to request an authorization, you had to commit to a minimum of rules, public interest, or transparency about what you would do, how you would use that channel, to what purpose. With the digital, it doesn't exist. The only rule is the click and the money. None of these private actors have a public interest perspective or even vision. This is the responsibility of the state to tell these actors, you can be a private actor, but if you want to have a reach, an access, a way to communicate with the majority of the people, you have to follow some rules. And we missed that with the internet, and we are missing it with the artificial intelligence. And many researchers and philosophers and other people thinking very hard about it are really pulling all the red flags, saying we have to be careful not to miss it with artificial intelligence, because we missed it with the internet already.
Thank you. We move on to a further question. We talked before about who is winning a narrative battle. So the question is, what actually means winning? In your perspective, how can one tell which side has the upper hand regarding narratives of a given situation? So we get here. Public opinion, echo in society, resources, diversity wins, acceptance by most actors, elections. Public opinion and public together are winning as criteria. So my question back to the panel, Adam. In my view, referring to public opinion is an interesting but a slightly vague move. I mean, let's assume the understanding of public opinion means what narratives actually prevails in the understanding of persons about the given situation, about the given logic and argument. So in the end, what is being enacted in public speeches by a majority of actors present in the scene or in coming out of survey would be the winning side?
It's difficult to me to answer that question about who's winning, who's losing, just in the sense of, because I think what we are experiencing is such a tremendous fragmented information context in which the side that I see is winning is my side often, right? Because we all live in a digital bubble. Mm-hmm. So depending upon who you ask, one side or another might say they're winning, and I think it depends upon sort of the context that we're talking about. So are we talking about an election? Well, who wins the election, I suppose. COVID was mentioned, and I agree. I feel that from an information standpoint, that was a tremendously fraught period of time for misinformation, disinformation. I guess the good side won because it's not over, so I don't know. And in the U.S., vaccines are still a contested territory. In the context of atrocity prevention, I think you can identify also very clearly. And so it depends upon sort of the moment. I think if I can go back to 1 second about this, the point about private sector and the rights-based approach, because I think this is really, really important. We've done some work in the past, IPI, with, I won't name what, a sort of tech company, in part in looking at the issue of universal connectivity as a basis for sustainable development. That in order to get to sort of supercharge sustainable development, we need to solve the digital divide. And what became clear very quickly is that, yes, everyone wants to be connected, but not everyone wants to be connected in the same way with the same information. No one really wants to be surveilled. Everyone wants to be safe online. And so, the rights-based approach is extremely important that you mentioned. And I think similarly, when you ask this question of who's winning, who's losing, it's the question of who feels safe in these communication environments is, to me, really important.
Caroline.
For me, the winner are the facts. And this is what should win. And maybe we disagree on how to interpret these facts, but there is no losing or winning information war if we don't even agree on the facts and the reality. So we always have to try to make sure that the facts win, and it goes for the work of journalists, but the scientifics and the research. We saw it with COVID, research and scientific truth being pushed away as not true. So winning an information war is for the facts to win.
Andrea, with your platforms, does this contribute to the winning objective Caroline mentioned?
Yeah, I tend to agree with her and also with Adam that, as also quoting what Her Excellency the President of Ethiopia said earlier today in the opening, in a war there are no winners. And at the same time, I think that the word information and war, they don't get along together. I think what is winning is information against disinformation, against misinformation. Information has to be verified and accurate information, as opposed to, of course, disinformation and misinformation.
But if I mean, now my very personal, subjective view, obviously being also an academic, I'm very much in support of facts, and verified facts, and they should be. But when I look into whatever is happening in whatever media, also serious newspapers, I read things, I have the feeling that very often the same facts may be used in very different perspectives. So people construct different narratives, journalists, directly affected people, stories are being told. There's also the whole concept of storytelling as a part of narratives. So we do. Let's assume for a moment that we communication is built on more or less established facts, which may also be difficult in wartime, obviously, but still it is. But you may do different things with them. You may build different narratives, and you may have contesting narratives. So what happens there with the facts? The same elements may be used in a different perspective. So who then should, if at all, decide which narrative is actually the most conducive one for peace or for a reduction of violence. I mean, for example, win a war, have a winner's peace, have stability. Not naming any conflict now, yes? On the other side, stop the war, get everyone a voice, start discussing, accept what is existing, and look for more inclusive and better accepted mid to long-term solution. So we have two opposing narratives, yeah? And everyone may be thinking about a particular conflict where this would adapt. I think there are several around now. So which narrative should prevail? Who has the legitimacy to decide which narrative should prevail, and how to make things such as that the respective narrative will actually dominate? These are many questions. 5 minutes before the end, but just as food for thought now for a last exchange among you. Adam, you're ready.
Well, I don't know what you said. Whose narrative should? I'm an optimist, but I find in this particular question it's very difficult to be optimistic about the facts should win, because I think that's absolutely, of course, right, and peace should win. But we're entering into a moment, I think, that is profoundly dangerous, and we think we've been grappling with this challenge of misinformation, disinformation. Hold on to your seats, because it's about to get much worse with AI and deep fakes and video. And so the question of what is the facts in many people's minds is going to be challenged, and everyone's going to have their own version of the facts. So that's really, really difficult. I think in some way, what that tells me is that we have to be proactive. Those, I think the UNESCO project on social media for peace is extremely important. And that's not just about defending against misinformation, disinformation, it's being proactive about countering it with the truth. Because there is truth. And it's going to be a struggle. I really do think we're heading into a very difficult time.
Yeah.
Andrea, anything to say in regard to this?
Yeah, I think that as said, is a collective process. So journalism, as someone said, is the first draft of history, and then of course history is and in this it's important to verify immediately, but also to keep the information for subsequent verification. So what we said about memory, and for instance, the fundamental role of in-depth investigative journalism to then verify and come, of course, maybe at a later stage with a more in-depth and comprehensive analysis. And this is really the role of journalism as a public good. And then eventually, who is going to decide are the audience. I really think that the bottom-up approach, and probably history as well.
Caroline, I mean, to wrap it up, and before asking a very last question to all of you, I mean, could one say that actually peace is too complex to win as a narrative against war narratives?
Again, let's stop talking about narrative,
yeah.
And let's, bring elements of what are the root cause of the conflict, what is the issue, why do people disagree, and have discussions and debates and multiple point of views about the reasons and the solutions. And I think the media can play a key role in that. It does not create one narrative, because indeed it's very complex and several perspectives, but it does bring keys for people at the end to decide what they want to do, how they understand the situation, and how they want to act, violently or not violently, regarding the situation.
Okay. With this, the last question was already asked to you. It's the same question, you may remember, which was asked at the beginning. How prepared do you feel peace builders are to address the challenges to narratives, sorry mentioning the word again, Caroline, narratives of peace and conflict. And we get
Did we help?
an interesting development. Interesting
was
is
it
always the
improvement or not?
word someone uses when the person doesn't exactly know what to say and wants to remain polite and win some time. So we get a clear rise in least prepared persons, 27, 28%, 29.
Oh, no.
We get, however, still about 50% of people medially not so badly prepared or medium level type of preparedness. And I don't want to, I mean, one shouldn't interpret too much into such figures, but I have the feeling we didn't help a lot in to improve the situation. But sometimes, and that's now serious, you know. I mean, in research in particular, but it's not research; it's just a particular field. I mean, it's always when you get more knowledgeable in things, and particularly you get more experience in things, you discover that it's actually even more complex than you might have thought, and there are more problems and more difficulties. So turning this into a positive side, actually we managed to convey more information, more sense of the complexity of the issues and the challenges ahead, which is the unavoidable first step to improve the state of the art. In that sense, I would like to thank all of you, Andrea, Caroline, and Adam, for your contribution to this panel. I would like to thank all of you sitting here in the room and virtually present for your very active, stimulating, and thought-provoking answers to the many questions we asked to you in Slido with rankings and with words, and there were quite some innovative words and suggestions also brought in. And I will not try in any way, also for time reasons, to wrap up content-wise what we have discussed, but I'm sure you are convinced, as we are, that it remains a very important topic, not only because of technological developments, but because of the changing international environment, the much more intense and controversial discussions which are happening about issues of war and peace, and I'm sure they will remain very, very important for the people directly affected, but also for people less affected through the conflicts themselves, but wanting to take part in discussions and possible reactions of their governments or their organizations to conflicts or the prevention of conflicts wherever they might be happening in the world, in Europe, or beyond. So thank you very much. And I was told to tell you that you should immediately move back to the plenary. I won't be able to check what you do, but I gave you the message. So enjoy maybe a very short break, and looking forward to see you in some other spaces of this International Cooperation Forum. Thank you very much also to the technicians. And the interpreters, of course.